Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, doesn't it? Like a path you thought was straight, suddenly winding into unknown territory. My name is Eleanor, and I've learned over the years that sometimes the most beautiful scenery is found on those detours you never planned. This is a story about one such winding road and the love that found its way back home. Alar and Simon had a love story that felt, to them and everyone who knew them, like it was written in the stars. They met in college, two bright-eyed idealists navigating the world together. Their connection was effortless, built on shared dreams, late-night talks, and a comfortable, easy affection that deepened into a love they believed would last forever. They married young, full of hope, their small apartment filled with laughter and plans for the future. For the first few years, those plans unfolded beautifully. They supported each other through graduate school, through challenging early careers. Ilara pursued her passion for art history, finding work at a local museum, while Simon threw himself into the demanding world of architecture. They were a team, cheering each other on, a quiet strength for one another in a sometimes daunting world. But as the years passed, their paths began to diverge, subtly at first like two rivers flowing from the same source, but gradually taking different directions. Simon's career demanded more and more of him. Late nights at the office became the norm. Business trips grew longer. He was building something important, a name for himself, but it required an intensity that left little room for anything else. Alara understood. She truly did. She was proud of his drive, his talent, but the quiet evenings they used to share, the spontaneous weekend getaways, they faded away, replaced by hurried dinners and tired silences. Ilara's work at the museum brought her a quiet satisfaction, but her life felt increasingly solitary. She tried to talk to Simon, to explain the growing distance she felt, the ache for connection. He would listen, his hand covering hers, his eyes full of genuine regret, but the demands of his work never lessened. "Just a little longer, love," he'd say. "Once this project is finished, once I make partner." But there was always another project, another goal just out of reach. Slowly, sadly, the easy intimacy that had been the foundation of their marriage began to erode. There were no dramatic fights, no betrayals, just a gradual drifting apart, like two boats untethered in a calm sea. They still cared for each other deeply. The love wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was buried under layers of unspoken needs and separate lives. The decision to separate was a quiet one, made over cups of cold coffee on a gray Sunday morning. There were tears, yes, but mostly a profound weariness, a shared acknowledgement that they couldn't find their way back to each other on the paths they were currently on. Maybe, maybe we just need space, Simon had said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Time to figure things out. Ilara agreed, her heart aching with a grief that felt strangely muted, like a dull ache rather than a sharp wound. They divided their things with a quiet politeness, their shared history packed into boxes alongside their books and furniture. Simon moved into a small apartment downtown, closer to his office, closer to the life that seemed to consume him. Alara stayed in their apartment, the silence amplifying the sense of loss. The months that followed were hard. Alara focused on her work, on rediscovering who she was outside of their marriage. She reconnected with old friends, took up painting again, tried to build a new routine. She and Simon spoke rarely, brief, stilted conversations about practical matters. The silence between them was louder than any argument had ever been. Life, however, wasn't finished with its surprises. Alara had been feeling unwell for a few weeks. Fatigue, nausea. She put it down to stress, to the emotional fallout of the separation. But the symptoms didn't go away. A friend finally persuaded her to see a doctor. Sitting in the sterile white room, the doctor's words washed over her, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. "Congratulations, Alara," the doctor said gently, a warm smile on her face. "You're going to be a mother." Alara stared at her, unable to speak, unable to process. Pregnant? How could she be pregnant? She and Simon had been careful, and even if they hadn't, it had been months since they'd been truly intimate, months since their separation. A wave of heat flooded her face. The last time, that one quiet evening, just before he moved out, a moment of shared sadness and comfort that had blurred the lines of their parting. It felt like a lifetime ago. The joy that should have accompanied such news was completely overshadowed by panic. A baby, now, alone? How could she possibly do this? And Simon, how could she tell Simon? He was charting a new course, focused on his career, seemingly moving on. This would shatter everything for both of them. She left the doctor's office in a daze, the little ultrasound picture clutched in her hand, feeling surreal, like it belonged to someone else. Days turned into weeks. The tiny life growing inside her was a secret she couldn't bring herself to share, especially not with Simon. She tried to call him a dozen times, her finger hovering over his name in her contacts, but the fear was paralyzing. What if he was angry? What if he denied it? What if he was happy with his new life and saw this as an unwelcome complication? The silence between them had grown into a chasm she didn't know how to cross. She started feeling unwell in a different way, a persistent ache in her side, a fatigue that went beyond the exhaustion of early pregnancy. She dismissed it as pregnancy symptoms, as stress, but a nagging worry started to form. She went back to the doctor, describing her new symptoms. The doctor, sensing her unease, ordered more tests, scans. The call came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Ilara was at the museum, trying to lose herself in the quiet beauty of ancient artifacts. Her doctor's voice was calm, but there was a gravity there that made Ilara's blood run cold. "Ilara," she said softly, "we need you to come in. Right away. Can you bring someone with you?" Ilara went alone. She couldn't think of anyone to ask. Her parents lived hours away. Her friends had their own lives. The museum seemed to spin around her as she drove back to the clinic, her heart pounding with a nameless dread. The news, when it came, was delivered with kindness, but it was a blow so profound it stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't a simple ailment. It was serious, very serious. An aggressive form of cancer, already more advanced than they liked to see. And the pregnancy, it complicated everything. The doctors explained the options, their faces etched with sympathy. Treatment needed to start immediately. Aggressive treatment. But that meant, the word hung in the air, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Termination. The tiny life inside her, the baby she hadn't even had a chance to tell its father about, was now at risk. She could delay treatment, try to carry the baby to term, but the risk to her own life would increase exponentially. It was a cruel, impossible choice. Ilara sat there, numb, the world outside the clinic window blurring. Terminate the pregnancy to save her life, or risk her life for the baby's chance? In that moment, there was no choice. The tiny flutter she had felt just that morning, the faint outline visible on the ultrasound. It was a life, their life. She couldn't give up on it. Not now. Not ever. I I want to keep the baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I understand the risks, but I want to try." The doctors looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. They outlined a plan, a precarious balance of monitoring the pregnancy while preparing for treatment as soon as the baby was viable or born. The road ahead was terrifying, uncertain. Leaving the clinic this time was different. The ultrasound photo still felt surreal, but it was joined by a stack of pamphlets on cancer treatment, on prognosis, on choices no one should ever have to make. She walked out into the crisp autumn air, feeling utterly alone, overwhelmed by the weight of the two lives she now carried, one within her and the precarious one that was hers. She knew she had to tell Simon now. There was no more time for fear or hesitation. This wasn't just about a baby anymore. It was about life and death. How to reach him, how to explain the unimaginable. As if fate itself had intervened, her phone rang as she stood on the sidewalk, the world spinning. It was Mark, Simon's old college friend, a mutual connection who had remained friendly with both of them. "Ilara?" Mark's voice was hesitant. "Hey, listen, I ran into Dr. Ramirez at the hospital just now. She mentioned, are you okay?" She looked really concerned. Dr. Ramirez was the doctor Ilara had just seen. News traveled fast in the medical community, even indirectly. Ilara's voice trembled. "Mark, I I'm not okay. Something's happened, she explained, stumbling over the words, the diagnosis, the impossible choice, her decision. Mark listened in stunned silence. Oh God, Alara, he finally breathed. I, I'll call Simon. He needs to know. Right now. Simon was on a business trip in another city. He was in a meeting when his phone vibrated with an urgent call from Mark. Mark rarely called, and his voice on the other end was frantic. Simon, you need to sit down. It's Alara. Something terrible has happened. It's serious. You need to come back. Now, Mark explained haltingly, focusing on the illness. Knowing that was shocking enough. He wasn't even sure if Alara had managed to tell Simon about the baby yet. Simon didn't hesitate. He canceled his meetings, booked the first flight back. The sterile efficiency of the airport, the drone of the plane engines, the blur of the world outside the window, it all faded into the background as a single thought consumed him. Ilara was sick. The woman he had loved, the woman who was still a part of him, was in danger. All the distance, the separate path, the unspoken resentments, they vanished in the face of this stark reality. He arrived back in the city late that night, went straight to her apartment. He let himself in with the key she had never asked for back. The apartment was quiet, dimly lit. He found her in the living room, curled up on the sofa, looking small and fragile, a thick blanket around her shoulders despite the mild temperature. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Elara, he said softly, his voice raw with concern. She looked up, startled, her eyes widening as she saw him standing there. Simon? How? Mark called me, he said, crossing the room quickly, kneeling beside the sofa. He reached out hesitantly, then gently took her hand. Her skin felt cool. He said, you were sick. What's happened? Are you okay? As he knelt there, his gaze swept over her, truly seeing her. And then he saw it, the gentle swell beneath the blanket, undeniable even to his untrained eye. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Ilara, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Are you? Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak. The shock, the fear, the confusion, it all hit him at once. A baby, their baby, and she was sick? Seriously sick? How far along are you? He asked, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Through her tears, she finally found her voice, the dam of unspoken fear and loneliness breaking. She told him everything. The unexpected pregnancy after their separation, her struggle to tell him, the diagnosis that had blindsided her, the impossible choice, her decision to fight for the baby. Simon listened, his face a mixture of horror and awe. The magnitude of what she was facing, what she was sacrificing, was overwhelming. All his work pressures, his ambitions, the perceived importance of his career, it all seemed trivial, meaningless in the face of life and death, of this new life they had unknowingly created together. Ilara, he said, his voice firm now, filled with a quiet resolve that surprised even himself. He moved to sit beside her on the sofa, pulling her gently into his arms. She felt so frail, so vulnerable. Our baby, he murmured into her hair. And you. My God, Ilara, you don't have to go through this alone. We'll face it together. All of it. From that moment on, Simon became a constant presence in Ilara's life. He adjusted his work schedule drastically, delegating responsibilities, turning down projects. His company protested, his colleagues were mystified, but he didn't care. Nothing was more important than Ilara and the life growing inside her. He went with her to every doctor's appointment, sitting beside her, holding her hand during the scans, listening intently as the doctors explained the risks, the monitoring plan. He learned about her cancer, about the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. He helped her prepare for the baby, buying tiny clothes, setting up a nursery in her apartment. He cooked for her when she felt nauseous, held her hair back when she was sick, rubbed her aching back, and just sat with her during the long, anxious nights when sleep wouldn't come. Their relationship wasn't like it had been before. The romance, the easy partnership of their early years had been replaced by something deeper, forged in the crucible of fear and uncertainty. It was a bond built on shared vulnerability, unconditional support, and a fierce, protective love for the future they hoped to have. The walls they had built between them crumbled, replaced by a quiet understanding, a reliance on each other that was more profound than anything they had ever experienced. The reasons for their separation now seemed distant, insignificant. What did career paths or late nights at the office matter when facing something like this? Ilara's pregnancy was monitored closely. The fear was a constant companion, but so was hope, fueled by Simon's unwavering support and the tiny kicks and flutters that were a tangible reminder of the life she was fighting for. When the time came, a few weeks earlier than a full term, but considered the safest window by her doctors, Ilara was admitted to the hospital for a planned C-section. Simon was by her side, his face pale but determined. The operating room was a sterile blur of activity, then a cry, a tiny, perfect sound that filled the room, and Ilara's heart with a love so fierce it almost eclipsed the fear. Their son Leo was born healthy and strong. Ilara held him for a few precious moments, tracing his tiny fingers, memorizing his face. Simon stood beside her, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their son, at Ilara. In that moment, they were just a mother, a father, and their child, the world outside the operating room fading away. But there was no time for a long recovery. Ilara's battle was just beginning. Soon after Leo was born, she began the aggressive treatment she had delayed: surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. The treatments were brutal, draining her strength, stealing her hair, leaving her weak and often in pain. Simon moved into Ilara's apartment permanently. He became Leo's primary caregiver, learning to change diapers, prepare bottles, soothe a crying baby, all while juggling the demands of helping Ilara through her treatments. He stayed up with Leo at night, woke early to get Ilara her medication, drove her to appointments, sat with her through agonizing chemotherapy sessions, held her hand when she was sick, and simply was there, a silent, unwavering rock. He never complained, never showed the exhaustion he must have felt. He just did. Ilara, weakened by the treatments, could do little more than watch sometimes, her heart aching with gratitude for this man, her former husband, who had stepped into the fire with her. She would lie in bed, listening to Simon singing soft lullabies to Leo, watching him expertly burp their son, and her heart would swell with a love that had been rekindled and purified by suffering. He wasn't the driven, distant man who had moved out of their apartment. He was a father, a caregiver, a partner in the truest sense of the word. Slowly, miraculously, Ilara started to heal. The treatments were working. Her energy began to return, tentatively at first, then with more certainty. She could hold Leo for longer, read to him, participate in his bath time. Simon watched her recovery with a quiet joy, supporting her as she regained her strength, physically and emotionally. 2 years after Leo's birth, Ilara was officially in remission. The shadow of cancer still lingered, a reminder of the battle she had fought, but she was well. Leo was a thriving, happy toddler, full of energy and laughter. Ilara and Simon had built a life together in those 2 years, a life centered around their son and the deep, unshakable bond they had forged through adversity. They were a family, stronger and more connected than they had ever been. They decided to have a small party to celebrate Leo's third birthday, a gathering of close friends and family who had supported them through the dark times. The apartment was filled with balloons, laughter, and the happy chaos of a child's birthday. As everyone gathered to sing Happy Birthday to Leo, Simon gently took Ilara's hand and led her to the center of the room. He looked into her eyes, his own full of emotion. "Ilara," he said, his voice clear and steady, "3 years ago, we were in a very different place. We had drifted apart. We thought our story was over. Then life threw us a curveball we never saw coming. You faced the hardest choice imaginable, and you chose hope. You chose us. You fought with incredible courage, and you brought this amazing little boy into our lives." He squeezed her hand. "Watching you, caring for you and Leo, I realized that everything I thought was important before, all the ambition, the work, it was just noise. This, he gestured to Leo playing happily nearby. And you, he looked back at Alara. This is what matters. This is my life. This is my home. He smiled, a tender, hopeful smile that mirrored the one she felt spreading across her own face. We found our way back to each other, Alara, through the hardest possible circumstances. We built something new, something stronger, out of the pieces of our old life. It wasn't the path we planned, but it led us here, to this family. He took a deep breath, his eyes shining. Ilara Hayes, he said, using her married name, the name she hadn't officially used in years, but had kept through everything. You saved our son's life, and in doing so, you saved mine. You showed me what love truly is. Will you give me the honor of marrying me again? Of spending the rest of our detour through life together? Officially this time? Forever? Tears streamed down Alara's face, but they were tears of joy, of profound relief, of a love that had survived the storm and found its way back to shore. She didn't need a moment to think. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Oh yes, Simon. 1,000 times, yes. He pulled her into a tight embrace, the room erupting in cheers and applause. Leo, sensing the emotion, toddled over and hugged their legs. They knelt together, holding their son, holding each other, a family reborn. Life's path is rarely straight, and sometimes the biggest detours lead you exactly where you were meant to be. Ilara and Simon found their way back to a love that was deeper, stronger, and more beautiful for having faced the darkness together. They had learned that the most valuable things in life aren't planned, aren't earned through ambition or success, but are given freely, fought for fiercely, and cherished with every breath. Their story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the unexpected turns of fate, and the enduring power of love to heal, to rebuild, and to find hope, even in the darkest of times. They walked forward, hand in hand, ready for whatever the road ahead might hold, knowing that together they could face anything.